Lee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for your kindness and your willingness to accommodate my schedule. Thanks to all of you for being willing to come here today. Before I get started with my questions, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit to the record a letter from the Utah Senate urging the Secretary of the Interior to withdraw the rule that is the subject of our discussion.
Without objection?
I'd also like to submit to the record a letter from the Utah Department of Natural Resource recommending that BLM reconsider moving forward with this regulation.
Without objection.
Ms. Leiter, is the EPA currently in the process of promulgating a rule or promulgating a set of regulations to regulate methane emissions from new oil and natural gas sources?
That is my understanding, yes. Sorry. There's a proposed rule that they recently took comment on, and my understanding is that they're in the process of finalizing a rule that would cover methane emissions from new and modified oil and gas sources.
Okay. So they're in the process of drafting regulations that would deal with methane emissions from new sources, new wells. Is the EPA also then in the process of developing regulations that would deal with methane emissions from existing sources of oil and natural gas?
I believe from some recent announcements that they're beginning a data gathering phase to ascertain the scope of the air problem from existing sources, and that, from my understanding of past similar efforts, would be the beginning of a multi-year effort to address those pollutants.
The administration has made the claim, a claim that I consider absurd, that its ability to implement policies to reduce waste somehow enables the BLM to regulate air emissions. Is the Department of the Interior aware of Utah's stringent regulations governing venting and flaring of waste?
Certainly, and in fact have learned from the good example of Utah, Colorado, and Wyoming in several aspects of the rule. And other states, I don't want to leave anybody off the list, but certainly at least those three.
Now, I think this is significant, the existing regulatory structure and those being developed by the EPA. In light of these state regulations in particular, this rule appears to me to be utterly unnecessary. Not only is the BLM superseding Utah's venting and flaring regulations, but it's doing so by usurping, or maybe better said, encroaching upon the regulatory powers that are reserved for the EPA. So separate and apart from this, you've got the state overlap, and then separate and apart from the state overlap, you've got overlap within the federal government between BLM and EPA. Now, and it's not as though the state is doing a bad job of this in my state. In 2015, Utah decreased the volumes of gas vented and flared from all wells, whether we're talking about new wells or existing wells, by 61%. I mean, this is pretty significant. Now, earlier today, I met with elected officials from Uinta County, Utah, where a whole lot of Utah's oil and natural gas production occurs. Utah's oil and natural gas industry today is, you might say, kind of on life support. And as a result, unemployment in Uinta County has risen to nearly 10%. With regulations like this one, regulations that I consider unnecessary and extraordinarily onerous, regulations like this one, I can only wonder whether the administration wants to snuff it out completely. So is it the opinion that regulations in place in Utah, regulations imposed by the state of Utah, are insufficiently regulating methane venting and flaring within Utah?
So there are some very good examples from states, including Utah. We have tried to learn from those, but the landscape of state regulation is uneven, and the aim of the administration, and really its obligation, is to reduce the waste of these resources from production on federal lands, and to do that in a consistent way across the country for all oil and gas production across federal lands.
I guess I struggle a little bit with the fact that, I mean, to the extent that the regulation in Utah by the state of Utah is sufficient, I wonder why then you're willing to throw out the Utah regulations.
The aim is not to throw out Utah's or any state's regulations, and there is a capacious variance provision in the Act for any state that seeks to demonstrate that its regulations are comparable and doing what our regulations would do. And any state that establishes that, operators within the state would then be able to follow the state's regulations rather than these.
I would hope that, that you would simply exempt Utah from the rule. I mean, in light of the fact that that we've had great success with it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all my time allows for.
Thank you, Senator Lee. Senator Heinrich.